Let me ask you something. When is the last time you actually aimed at something? Not just managed towards something, not just worked in the general direction of something, not just told yourself someday you'd get serious about something. Aimed, like your whole life depended on the trajectory. Now, most people I talk to, high performers, sales leaders, executives, people who by every external measure are absolutely crushing it, most of them stopped aiming a long time ago. They're moving, they're busy, they're producing, but they're not aimed at anything real anymore. And deep down in the places that they don't talk about at offsites or on LinkedIn, they know it. This episode is for those people. This is about what happens when everything you aimed at for 12 years disappears in a single conversation. What the silence after that feels like, what it costs, and what it means to truly relaunch, not just professionally, but as a human being. And it starts, of all places, with 4 astronauts and a rocket pointed straight at the moon. Stay with me. Welcome to Eyes Wide, the podcast. I am Craig Palmer, your host, and this is going to be a solo mission. As always, we try to target right around 25 minutes for a solo mission, but I'm so thrilled that you are here with me today and you have decided to check out this show. So with that, I don't want to waste any of our precious time, any of your precious time. So let's get right to it. So let's set the stage. It's April 1st, 2026. The place is the Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral, Florida. If you've never seen it live, it's pretty damn cool. 4 astronauts climb into a spacecraft called Orion, and they head towards the moon. For the first time since 1972, 54 years. I want you to actually feel that number because it's not just a statistic. 54 years ago, the last man to walk on the moon, a guy named Eugene Cernan, stepped off the lunar surface, looked back at it and said, "We shall return." And then nothing. The shuttle program, Columbia, Challenger, budget cuts, political cycles, a country that moved on. Decades of, we're still working on it. 54 years of a pause. And here's the thing about that pause that most people don't really talk about. You see, during those 54 years, nobody inside NASA said that the mission was over. They didn't dismantle the dream. They didn't rewrite history and pretend they'd never aimed at the moon in the first place. They kept building quietly, without headlines, without the glory, because the mission wasn't the moon. The moon was always just the waypoint. The mission, the real mission, was Mars. And you cannot get to Mars without first getting back to the moon. So here's the question that's been sitting with me ever since that rocket first launched. What if the thing that you lost, the thing that got taken from you or fell apart or ended before you were ready, what if that wasn't really the mission? What if that was just the waypoint? And what if the pause, as brutal as it felt in that moment, was exactly what was required to get you to where you were actually supposed to go? I can answer that question from a very personal experience. And I haven't really talked about this on the mic before. Those of you that know me in my personal life who are listening, they know a lot about this story, but I've never talked about it publicly here. But the end of April in 2024, I'm on a Microsoft Teams call with the new CEO of the company that I spent 12 years building. 12 years. From hire number 1 to, let's call it 150 people, from zero revenue in the US to $50 million, 13 consecutive quarterly earnings beats, having the opportunity to ring the bell at the NASDAQ building. This is 12 years of my life poured into that mission, and it ended on a video call. No room, no handshake, no dignity of a face-to-face conversation, just a face on a screen reading me a script written to him by human resources, telling me that my chapter, this chapter, was over. And I want to tell you what happened inside me in that moment, because this is the part that nobody talks about. You see, as the words started coming, the typical words you hear, restructuring, new direction, we appreciate everything. Something happened that I did not expect. And I stopped hearing them. My mind left the room, and it went immediately, involuntarily, without my permission, but it went straight to my daughters. And it didn't go to the good moments. It didn't go to the recitals and the graduations and the Sunday morning pancakes. It went to all the moments that I missed. The ordinary Tuesday nights that I just wasn't home for. The moments I was sitting at the dinner table and completely somewhere else. The conversations that never happened because I was on a call or in flight or already mentally in the next city I was headed to. The version of their childhood that existed in the years that I gave everything to a mission that was now telling me through a pixelated screen that my services were no longer required. Now, you know how they tell you that when your life ends, it kind of flashes before you. That is what happened, except it wasn't my life flashing. It was theirs. And I sat there in that chair staring at that screen, and I thought, I made a devastating gamble. And unfortunately, my daughters paid part of the price. That is not easy to say, but it's true. And I'm saying it because I know I'm not the only one listening right now who's ever felt it. The work family got so much of me, the same way I imagine your work families get so much of you. My real family, the two girls that have my whole heart, they got what was left. And on that call, in the silence, because I think I just stopped remembering how to really speak, I just had to sit with that. Now, a few weeks later, after all the dust settled, I reached out to one of the board members. And this is an individual that I respected, someone who had a front row seat to everything that we built at this organization. And I called him for guidance. I called him because I needed someone who knew the full picture of how to help and to see what I should be looking to do next. And what he said on this call, without anything else, really, something I'll never forget. And I'll quote, he said, "Craig, you have 9 months. 9 months before your shine wears off and nobody wants you. 9 months." Now, let me tell you what that felt like. It felt like a threat disguised as advice. It felt like someone drawing a line in the sand and just daring me to make it to the other side before the tide came in. Now, after hearing that, it became very difficult to know what I was supposed to do. Was I supposed to chase the first thing available? Do I make a desperate move just to prove the clock wrong? Do I aim at the wrong moon? But here's what those months actually looked like. They were uncomfortable. They were humbling. They were longer, and they were harder, and they were quieter than I anticipated. There were days that the doubt was immensely deafening, and days I questioned everything I thought I knew about myself. Days that board member's voice was much louder than my own. But in that quiet, in that space that only getting stripped down creates, something happened. You see, I stopped asking myself, where do I go back to? And I started to ask myself, who do I want to be when I get there? Now, those are not the same question. And the gap between them is where everything changes. You see, the first question is about recovering what you lost. The second question is about becoming something that the loss made possible. Fight Club, one of my favorite movies of all time. There's a line in Fight Club where Tyler Durden is addressing the club, and he says to the group, "Until you lose everything, you can't do anything." And this is exactly what that was. I stopped trying to rebuild the old mission. That mission was gone. And I started asking myself what the real mission had been all along. Now, here's what I know now that I didn't know on that Teams call. I had been running a belief system, deeply embedded, industry reinforced, 25 years in the making, that said this: to be elite at work, you sacrifice at home. The two are in permanent competition with one another. You choose one and you make peace with the one that you give up. That belief built a career, but it also cost me moments with my daughters I will never get back. And sitting in the rubble of everything that belief had prioritized, sitting in the quiet of those moments, I finally saw it clearly. That belief was wrong. Not just emotionally wrong, strategically wrong, because the best version of me as a leader, the version that walks into a room and commands it, that builds teams and earns trust and drives results, that version is better when he's not running from guilt at home. You see, you don't perform at your ceiling when you're carrying that type of weight. I didn't have to choose between being a great dad and being a force at work. I had to learn to be both simultaneously without apologizing for either one. Balance is not weakness. Balance is what makes being elite sustainable. And sustainable is what wins. Woo! Getting fired up today. Getting real fired up. All right, so bring this to today. My family and I just got back from spring break, and we spent the week in Tennessee. Took my oldest daughter to the University of Tennessee. Campus visit, campus tour. A shout out to the University of Tennessee. That school is amazing. The tour was amazing. The tour guides, exceptional. Great representation of what that school can build. And so, bravo. She's a junior in high school, so I've got one more year with her, and then she leaves off to college. And I had an opportunity to just stand there on that campus, watching her eyes light up at what her future could look like. And I thought back to that Teams call, about that flash, about every moment that I believed that I had lost. But I was there, not half there, not mentally already on to the next problem, there, fully, with her. And you want to know if the relaunch worked? That's how I know. It's not the title. It's not the revenue. It's not the board presentation. It was the college tour. That was my proof. And when I think about that rocket leaving the ground earlier this month, 4 humans pointing themselves right at the moon for the first time in 54 years, this is what I think about. It wasn't engineering that made Artemis possible. It wasn't the funding. It was someone inside the mission deciding in the middle of that 54-year pause that the mission still mattered. The relaunch you plan is rarely the relaunch that changes your life. Now, I thought my moon was one thing, but it turns out my moon moved. And what's being built now, professionally, personally, as a father, is bigger than anything I could have seen from that chair in April of 2024. That call, that screen, that moment, that was my launch pad. The pause is not the ending. It never was. Not for NASA, not for me, and certainly not for you. So what actually makes a relaunch possible? It's not emotion. It's not motivation. It's not a highlight reel you replay to hype yourself up. You need a framework, something structural, something that holds up when the doubt is loud and the clock is ticking and the people around you have opinions about when your shine is going to wear off. You need 3 things. 1, you have to remember what it felt like to fly accurately. Not the romanticized version, the real version, the preparation, the grind, the calls that didn't go your way and the ones that did. The moment you realized that the system was working. Now, here's what happens when you get knocked down that nobody warns you about. You start to rewrite your own history. You start to wonder if the results were real, if you actually built what you thought you built, if the success was circumstance rather than capability. That rewrite is the most dangerous thing that will ever happen to you. More dangerous than getting fired, more dangerous than the 9-month clock, because if you let someone else's decision redefine your capability, you will aim too small on the other side. I knew what I built was real. I knew the results were earned. I refused to let one conversation on a Teams call rewrite 12 years of evidence. Hold the memory of your capability like a weapon, because when the doubt gets loud, that memory is the only thing that will keep you aimed at the right target. 2, the relaunch requires a new mission, not just a new attempt. Most people get this wrong. The instinct after a fail is to replicate. Same industry, same title, same playbook, just a different company. That's not a relaunch. That is a copy. Artemis is not Apollo with a software update. It is a fundamentally different mission, different objective, different scale. The moon isn't even in the destination. It's the infrastructure for something no one in 1972 was seriously talking about. When life forces a relaunch, it's rarely asking you to repeat yourself. It's asking you to evolve. The evolved mission is almost always bigger, but you have to be willing to release the old blueprint to see it. And that release, letting go of what you thought the mission was supposed to look like, that might be the hardest thing I'm asking you to do today. Do it anyway. 3, you need people who still believe in the launch. This one is non-negotiable. The Artemis program survived budget cuts, administration changes, public indifference, and 54 years of maybe someday. Do you know why? Because there were people inside the mission who refused to let the pause become the ending. When everything goes quiet after a fall, and it will go quiet, I promise you that, the people in your corner are everything. Not the ones who validate you blindly, not the ones who tell you exactly what you want to hear, the ones that will look at you in the middle of all that doubt and say, the mission still matters. Get back to the launch pad. Find those people. Protect those relationships. And this is important. Be that person for someone else right now. Because somewhere in your world, there is a person who is on month 6 of their 9 months. And they are running out of people who still believe in their launch. Be the one who does. All right, we're getting into the final stretch here. For those of you still going, thank you. And I hope that you're getting something out of what we're discussing here today. I think it's an important episode, an important leadership lesson, a life lesson, a business lesson to really think through and think through for yourself. But I want to leave you with one thing, a question, one question. What have you been calling a pause that you secretly fear might be an ending? Because that fear, that specific fear, is the most important thing in your professional life right now. More important than your pipeline, more important than your quota, more important than whatever is sitting in your inbox. That fear is telling you something. It's telling you that the mission still matters. Dead things don't scare you. You don't fear the end of something you stopped caring about. The fear only lives where the fire still lives. So if you feel it, if that question landed somewhere uncomfortable, that's not a sign that it's over. That's a sign that the launch pad is still yours. Eugene Cernan stood on the moon in 1972 and said, "We shall return." He had no idea it was going to take 54 years. He didn't know it would outlive him. He said it because the mission was real. And real missions don't end because the timeline gets hard. That board member gave me 9 months. Maybe someone has given you a clock too. Maybe it was a boss, a market, a diagnosis, a divorce, a decision that has restructured your entire identity in a single conversation. Or maybe, and this is the one I want you to really sit with, maybe you gave yourself the clock. Maybe you're the one who decided your shine was fading. Maybe you're the one counting down instead of counting up. You are not past your expiration date. The mission is not over. And the moon that you thought you were aiming at, the one that felt like the whole point, may have only been the waypoint. The real destination is still out there. And you don't get there by staying in that chair. 4 astronauts launched into space earlier this month, into a world that is loud and chaotic and uncertain and on fire in more ways than one. And they aimed at the moon anyway. Not because conditions were perfect, because the mission was real. Your mission is real. It's time to relaunch. All right, if this episode hit something for you, I want to hear about it. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like this episode. And please, if you know someone who needs to hear this today, someone who may be in the middle of their pause, someone who's been told their shine is wearing off, send it to them right now, before this episode is even over. That is how this podcast grows. That is how this mission spreads. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out the way I close out all of my episodes, reminding each of you that this life is what you make of it. The future you is waiting patiently to meet the current you. Continue to work to find your tomorrow in today and fight like hell to keep the promises you make to yourself. Until we meet again, eyes wide, see everything. Goodbye.